Abby Williams and Libby German were just out on a trail taking a hike on a nice day off from school on an unseasonably warm February day. As they were going over an old abandoned railroad bridge, they were abducted when a man came up from behind them. They were never seen alive by their friends or parents. What happened in this crazy case? Being abducted off of that railroad bridge wasn't the first time they went off the rails. What happened later in the investigation and the prosecution was beyond anything really anyone can really accept. Here are 10 ways this case, the Delphi murders, went off the rails.
Everything about this case is a mess. Everything has just been horrible. The fact that it happened to begin with is horrible. The fact that it's taken 6 years to get to the point where we are now is horrible. And the fact that it's still a mess is equally as horrible. Today, we're going to be discussing how this case went off the rails. I'm Lainey Law.
And I'm attorney Andrew Myers.
And we're going to be talking about 10 points that have this case completely off the rails. Now, Andrew, for those uninitiated to the Delphi murders, can you give us a little backstory on this?
Well, why don't we jump right into number 10. The 10th reason this case went off the rails is that it happened at all. Since when can't a couple of kids go out on a day off from school and have a nice, safe walk on a rail trail, which is what they were doing? February 13th, 2017, 13-year-old Abigail Williams and 14-year-old Libby German, known as Abby and Libby, went for a walk on a trail system in Delphi, Indiana. They never returned home. Abby and Libby were dropped off at 1:49 p.m. at the trailhead on an unseasonably warm day, a day off from school. It would later be discovered that at 2:13, as they crossed an abandoned railroad bridge known as the Monan High Bridge, they were encountered by a male who came up from behind saying, "Guys, down the hill." Libby had the presence of mind to take a video with her cell phone. It was somewhat blurry, but that is a key piece of evidence in this case. The girls had always before been very reliable, and so when they did not show up at the agreed upon pickup time, family members, community members, and local authorities all began searching. The next day, their bodies were found in a wooded area a half-mile away from that bridge.
It's horrible. And one of the things that kind of sticks out about this situation and kind of also adds to the how horrible it is that it's been so long that this has been developing is the fact that they even thought to make the recording at all. I think a lot of us have been in uncomfortable situations, and it was, these kids are obviously extremely bright to even thought of, when you're feeling uncomfortable like that, to take your phone and to try to get a recording. And, obviously they had some good ideas there, because unfortunately we're here where we are now, which sad, yeah.
I mean, they were real smart to do that, but the fact that there was in fact some kind of a photograph takes us to reason number 9 that this case is just off the rails. Look at these two pictures. 2 different sketches of a person of interest were released to the public at various times. The first one on the left was released in July 2017 and was said to be based on the video that Libby had taken on her cell phone as the 2 girls crossed the bridge. Then the second one, almost 2 years later on the right, released in April 2019 and was explained to be based on, quote, new information and intelligence. Indiana State Police also explained that the first sketch now had been based on eyewitness accounts. What? Why are these pictures of the same suspect so different?
And also it's interesting too, because now looking forward, when you look at the content that was taken on the phone, it's interesting because I mean, I don't know about anybody watching, I don't know about you, Andrew, but I would argue that this barely looks like either of them. I mean, the one that we're seeing, the gentleman with the hat's a little bit more similar, but it's like, how are you going to say eyewitness accounts when if there were eyewitness accounts, you would think that we'd be a little bit further in this case right now, like, of
No,
seeing
I
if
agree with you
yeah.
totally. I mean, I agree with you totally. Neither one of those guys looks like the other. And also, neither one of the guys really looks like Richard Allen, who we're going to see in a minute or two. The next way this case went off the rails, number 8, also in April of 2019, over 2 years after the killings happened, authorities finally released the video from Libby's phone showing the man walking behind the girls on the abandoned railroad bridge. Now, they had released the still photograph of the guy on the bridge much earlier, but they never released the actual video until April 2019. And following the release of the second sketch and this video, investigators received hundreds of tips, but still no progress in the case.
Mhm. And it's another point too where it took years to get this video, and obviously, they don't wanna give out more of the evidence than they don't wanna put all their cards out, but at the same time, how you say that they got all these tips, it's like if they had at least given a little this video sooner, maybe more could have been done, especially where if it's recent, you're not really gonna completely forget everything. You'll know if you were on that trail versus 2 years later. Were you on the trail that day or did you go the week after or before? So this could have been more helpful earlier on, in my
Okay.
opinion.
I agree with you. Number 7 way this case has gone off the rails. Along the way, investigators allegedly considered several different potential persons of interest. There was a man with the last name of Klein who lived in Peru, Indiana, who had a fake social media account under the name of Anthony Schatz. He was reported to have used that fake account to communicate with Libby at some time before Abby and Libby's demise. Also, at some point in August of 2020, authorities arrested this person of interest on numerous unrelated counts of child solicitation, child exploitation, and possession of child porn. But dots never directly connected him to Abby and Libby's deaths, according to what investigators have revealed. Another person of interest who was also cleared by investigators had the initials BH. His then 16-year-old son, LH, was allegedly dating Abby before the murders. BH is said to have posted imagery somewhat similar to what was found at the scene of the crime, images never made public until a leak in October 2023. Investigators did look at several others, but no charges were ever brought against them.
That's everything about that is insane to me. It it's kind of bizarre to me, and I think with the prominence of social media and technology and camera phones is probably related to this, but that's a lot of, surprisingly close people that could have potentially been connected, and also, like, insane that these people could have also been cleared at that time too is insane to me. It's, like, both weird that it's so close and also weird that they got cleared.
I agree. Well, hold on to your hat, fasten your seatbelt. Enter Richard Allen. 5.5 years after Abby and Libby's deaths in October 2022, Richard Allen was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder in this case. But now we have to back up to the actual time of the crime. The month before Richard Allen's arrest in 2022, law enforcement reviewing files in the case came across a February 2017 report. At that time, right after the crime, Richard Allen had contacted a tip line. So way back in February of 2017, Allen called the tip line to provide information on what he had seen on the trail on the day of the girl's disappearance. Allen met with Indiana Department of Natural Resources Officer Dan Doolin at a grocery store in Delphi. During Doolin's interview, Allen had stated that he was on the trail from 1:30 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. on February 13th, the day of Abby and Libby's disappearance. He said he saw 3 females. Later, Doolin would say he couldn't find his recording, even though he always recorded everything. He couldn't find this one. Now, by contrast, in a voluntary statement on October 13th, 2022, now 5.5 years after the crime, Richard Allen admitted his presence on the trail on that day, but now gave a different time frame of his presence on the trail is now between noon and 1:30, before the girls were said to be dropped off at 1:49 in the afternoon. Somewhere along the way, a statement had been made that clerical error may have been making the police overlook Richard Allen right after the event. However, despite the apparent breakthrough in the investigation, authorities still didn't release very many details about the Delphi killings.
And the time span in between these kind of goes back to what I was saying before, where it's just like you have all of this extra time that passes in between where, I mean, obviously it can be kind of hard to keep your story straight, but it's also hard in the same time, same situation. It's interesting because in a way to say that he was always recording everything and just didn't have that recording uh sounds a bit like a self-report, but at the same time, this is also someone that called in and said that they had information, and it's hard to believe that obviously it has happened and it does happen, but that he would intentionally incriminate himself is a little interesting too, where it's like he could have not called the tip line. So you kind of have that weighing against each other. It's like, oh, well, the story's changing, but also he tried to contact them initially at the same time.
Yeah, two things that strike me about this reason that this case went off the rails. First of all, as you pointed out earlier, I don't think that the two totally different sketches that we took a look at earlier look at all like either one of these pictures of Mr. Allen. It doesn't look like him at all. The second thing that strikes me is that, right after this happened, he had a time frame that was pretty close to when the girls were absolutely on that trail. 5.5 years later, he had a different time frame. But you want to know something? I go hiking a lot, and I go on rail trails a lot because I don't like climbing mountains and rocks all that much. I've been on rail trails near where I live a lot. Ask me when I was on a particular rail trail 5.5 years ago. I haven't a clue. I'd have to look at a calendar to say, oh, that was a Sunday afternoon. Oh, geez, I had to do my laundry that day, and I had to walk the dog that day, and I had to cook dinner that day. Oh, a friend called me on the phone. So I don't know if I was on that trail at noon or 3 or 2 or so. I mean, the general rule of thumb when you have conflicting statements is you go with the one that's closest in time. But, again, why was it that Mr. Allen apparently called the tip line, right after this happened in February of 2017, and, it's filed away somewhere? And why is it that it's some kind of a conservation officer? He's an officer at the Indiana Department of Natural Resources, and the interview was done at a grocery store. Have you ever heard of any serious?
That is really bizarre.
Have you ever heard of any serious case ever where someone interviewed a potential suspect in a case at a grocery store?
A lot of grocery stores don't even have places to sit down.
No.
Yeah.
No. There are high-end grocery stores where you can sit down, but it's not appropriate to be taken some kind of I guess it wasn't a formal statement, but on the other hand, it was kind of formal in that this guy, Dan Doolin, claims anyhow that he recorded it. Well, what happened to this case is off the rails, and we're not even halfway through yet. Reason number 5, the case went off the rails, and that is I don't have you in the picture. I'm sorry. Where are you? There you are. You reappeared. So as Allen's case, now we have a person of interest or a suspect, whatever they want to call him. And as the case starts going through the court system, the Carroll County Circuit Court Judge Benjamin Diener recused himself from the case, which paved the way for the Indiana Supreme Court to eventually appoint Allen's Superior Court Judge Fran Gull as a special judge to oversee this case. And Gull ruled, okay, the jury trial for the Delphi killings would remain in Carroll County. But she also ruled that the jury itself would come from Allen County, since she said it would be difficult, if not impossible, to find an impartial jury in Carroll County. Now, here's where it kind of goes off the rails from the original judge. According to reports, the initial judge who recused himself blamed the public's bloodlust for his taking himself off the case. He was also reportedly upset with online videos showing the faces of the judge's family members. An Indiana Supreme Court spokesperson indicated the judges face no requirement of explaining a reason for their recusal. So too hot to handle for the first judge. I can't say I blame him, but somebody's got to do it, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and also at the end of the day, too, if you're like recusing yourself, obviously this is inappropriate. You should never go after the judge's family. You should not go after anybody involved in these cases. You never have any type of involvement whatsoever. But at the same time, then you're just putting it on someone else. It's like, "Oh, I've been getting harassed, I've been getting death threats, they're showing my family, so let's make the situation doubly as worse to get somebody else's family involved in this now," which it's not right either way, but it's also just gonna happen to the next person anyway, and like you said, someone has to do the job.
Yeah, sometimes comments just go way over the edge and it's not right. I mean, I'm a licensed member of the bar in 2 states. And so, I have to be really careful about the things that I say. I'm not going to be like some other people that do podcasts and just, let it go off the rails. And we're not going to, when we get more deeply into this particular thing, we're not going to go into some details. Real sad, just another case we'll talk about real briefly. And that is there was a judge in Maryland that was actually shot dead at his house a couple of weeks ago. There had been a divorce hearing. One of the parties didn't show up, and the custody of the kids was granted to the mother, and the guy shot the judge. And it's just, it's horrible. And people have to watch what they say, what they do, and all that kind of stuff. And so, I don't know.
Yeah, it's horrible that but the thing is, it's just like at the end of the day, you're just trying to do your job. And in that situation, you're not showing up to the hearing. Maybe that decision is for the best. Obviously, I don't know anything about that. I can't say for sure. But there's no reason that anybody should have to fear for their safety when they're just doing their best to do their job. And the fact that things like that can happen, the fact that any of this stuff happens is just insane.
It is. Now, we had both expressed our head scratching about Mr. Allen. So now the case is going to go off the rails again. This is the 4th way the case went off the rails. During a court hearing in June 2023, the prosecutor dropped the bombshell that Allen had confessed. Not only that, he'd confessed 5 or 6 times that he killed Abby and Libby. But wait a minute, anyone who's watched Making a Murderer about a famous Wisconsin case knows that there's a long list of reasons confessions are not always reliable or indicative of guilt. So attorneys, including the defense attorneys here, have a problem with quote unquote alleged confessions. Richard Allen's attorneys attributed the confessions or incriminating statements, 1, to abuse at the correctional facility, 2, his client's deteriorating mental state, and 3, the stressful environment. Defense attorney Bradley Rosie attributed Richard Allen's declining mental state to poor treatment and being treated as a prison of war at the prison where he was being housed. He wasn't in a regular jail. Even though he's innocent until proven guilty, they held him in a prison. His attorneys had formally requested to have Allen moved to a different facility, but that was denied by Judge Gull in July of 2023. And it had been claimed, and we don't know, it was just a claim, that Allen's holding cell was the size of a dog pen. What?
I mean, looking back at our past videos, I will say if you look at the video we did with the animals in Methuen, I will say those dog kennels for dogs are relatively big, not so much for a human. That being said, it's a little because the thing is thinking about it this way, it's sad and disturbing that they're asking to be switched to a different facility, presumably because the people that are in this facility are relatively local, and when you get into situations where kids are involved, the other inmates a lot of the times do have kids and feel very strongly about that. And regardless of whether or not this person is innocent or not, it is well, I mean, we've seen it before where these inmates get treated horribly and punished and outcasted and beat up, and I don't know this person's mental state before and after. I don't know if this person is guilty or innocent, but at the same time, it's plausible that someone could be broken down. It's uh interesting, like we mentioned before, it's like they could have potentially incriminated themselves by even calling the tip line originally. Now, there's different aspects about that, not to say that killers haven't done that kind of stuff, but they're just, trying to get him at least moved to a different facility. And it's regardless of whether or not this person is guilty or innocent, it's a little sad to see that that got denied.
Some of these confessions or purported confessions, I'm going to call them claimed confessions, were made on the telephone in conversations with Mr. Allen's wife and daughter. Apparently, everyone knows that those conversations are listened to. Anyone who's ever, had a client or a friend or anyone else in jail knows that when you're talking to somebody in jail on the telephone, that call is being monitored. I don't care what anybody says. That's a fact.
Mhm.
The next reason this case went off the rails, in June of 2023, a number of previously secret court documents were released. Reportedly, as many as 100 court documents were unsealed at that time. The documents revealed to the public for the first time ever that Abby and Libby's wounds were caused by a sharp object. This was the first time authorities indicated publicly how the two girls died. This accompanied the judge in the case unsealing more than 100 documents, revealing, among other things, the records alleged that at one point the warden of the facility told investigators that Allen had been, are you ready for this? Wetting down paperwork he had gotten from his attorneys and eating it. He was also refusing to eat and sleep. The documents also included a note that investigators believe both a gun and a knife were involved in the murders of the two girls, and that clothing items, including underwear and socks, were missing from the crime scene. So,
horrible. Just, I don't even have words for any of that. I mean, like we talk about deteriorating mental state to be eating paper like that. Obviously, no okay person is to do that. Now, is that to say that he wasn't well before and that's why this situation happened? Or are you taking someone and or is their mental state significantly deteriorating because you have these prisons where, criminals or not, these people are being treated like animals? It's horrifying, scary, nightmare inducing to think.
right. And I'm just going to come out and say that, as crazy as those items are, there was intense scrutiny. I remember when this came out, there was intense scrutiny and publicity over all of this because there's just been so much secrecy. These murders happened way back in 2017, and here it is 2023. And people are wondering what's going on. They're curious. They have a real void in their understanding of what's going on. And then this, I mean,
Mhm.
that is just now. All right. So the next thing is that this case really, you think those things are to take note of. The case is really going to go off the rails now. Lainey, have you ever heard of Odin?
Greek god?
No, close. Nordic.
Nordic?
I'll be honest, I had never heard of this ever. And I think a lot of people that have commented about this case have never heard of this. So in September of 2023, this case derailed even further. This time, Allen's defense team presented new thoughts on how the Delphi killings happened, which involved the girls being, and I quote, ritualistically sacrificed by a cult related to Odinism. In a court document, they alleged that members of a pagan Norse religion called Odinism had been hijacked by white nationalists, that they ritualistically sacrificed Abby and Libby. They claimed that very early on, investigators had actually consulted with a Purdue University professor about the killings because of some strange things about the scene of the crime, including runes, signatures, and patterns of sticks on top of the bodies. They claimed that some of the prison guards were part of this cult and actually wore Odin patches on their uniforms.
Oh.
Now, this goes a lot deeper than we can address in this podcast, so we'll do a deep dive into the Odinism cult theory in our next podcast. But prosecutors called the defense's Odinism claims, quote, a fanciful defense for social media to devour, and said the claims are not supported by evidence. The state has strongly condemned the allegations and decision to file a 136-page memorandum, including the Odinism claim. Prosecutors also call the release sensationalist, unprofessional, and lacking in any factual basis. Whew.
A lot.
I can't believe I even read that. I mean,
It's a strong pivot. It's an insane pivot. It's an interesting pivot. Um, it's such a small town is the thing too. It's the fact that we're having security guards wearing these patches. Very bizarre if that's actually the case. That being said, it's a very strong and interesting pivot, especially thinking if how these bodies are found and those kinds of circumstances. But it's also to think about cults and sacrifices, especially in such a small town, is so crazy.
I mean, I guess we're supposed to think it's not that crazy. When I first heard this, and I grabbed a newspaper. I like newspapers. I know you like to read stuff online, but I like newspapers. I grabbed the newspaper and I'm reading this. And I said, what? And I guess we're supposed to think, well, it's not all that out of the ordinary, because let's think back to Charles Manson. He pretended he was Jesus Christ, and he told his followers that he was the leader and they all had to do certain things with him. We'll just put it that way. And they did worship him. And it was a cult by every definition. And there have been some crazy cults as time goes on. And we're going to dive into this a little bit more deeply in our next podcast, but it's tough to believe. I'm left reeling, not knowing what I believe. What do you believe? I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm not going to reveal what I think, but I'm going to make you say, what do you think?
It's all incomprehensible to me, because the thing is, it's like you think of like people in a cult and it's like that's something that you can't even imagine doing, that's like incomprehensible. But then you also think about like people who murder, and then like you mentioned like Charles Manson, is like you have these people thinking that he is the god and like that they do have to listen to him. So it is all really insane. It's like it's like logical to think, oh, there's no way because I wouldn't do it, but at the same time, like just because you wouldn't do something, doesn't mean that other people haven't already been doing it for hundreds of years.
I guess, but again, I mean, I consider myself fairly well read. I've been reading true crime since the days of Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, and then Vincent Bugliosi's book about Charles Manson, Helter Skelter. Then I came into Anne Rule's books. What an incredible writer she was. And this is something that, unless I'm forgetting something, which is possible, I've just never read anything like this. I've just never read anything like this. Sure, there are cults. There was that crazy cult, the Jimmy Jones cult that went down to Guyana and drank the Kool-Aid. But I mean, is this really, really, really believable? I just don't know.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, I don't know about Odinism myself, and there could be people out there to be very offended that, oh, people would say that Odinism could be related to murders. I don't know anything about this, so I apologize if maybe Odinism is all about murders. But there's a lot of different levels to it. The thing is, I had the displeasure of being like a child when the internet was in its infancy and it was very easily accessible to get to, like you would be scrolling and just randomly there's some horrific graphic scenes. So it's there's disturbing things happening in the world, and even though we don't see it that much, and now fortunately we're at a point where like the internet is, you have to dig pretty deep and know where you're going. It's pretty scrubbed clean of finding these horrific things. But I mean, we see all these stories about these school shooters and all these types of crazy things. There's so many holes that people can fall into where if you have a good support system, like you might not experience at all. But when you have untethered access to a computer, even, or maybe just the people that you're around, there's so many possibilities of what could happen. It's crazy.
Sure. Okay. So you think that the case went off the rails then? We're not even at the station yet, but we're going to be in a second. The number one way in that way that this case went off the rails is now that there's been a huge meltdown in the relationship between Richard Allen's defense attorneys, the judge, and the court itself. I mean, we don't know where this case is going. In October of 2023, sensitive photographs of the crime scene of a highly disturbing nature were leaked out to several parties. These photos were said to be of an incredibly graphic nature. There was no evidence that either of the attorneys themselves, Baldwin or Rosie, were the actual leakers. Signs pointed to a former employee. And you say that the web has been sanitized. Those photographs were leaked to another podcaster. They immediately reported them to the court and deleted them. They're on the web. I've seen them with watermarks, and they are disturbing. They shouldn't have been released. If you're an attorney in a case, well, we'll get into that. A hearing had been scheduled for different reasons on October 26th of 2023, but after a 2-hour delay, Judge Gull came out and announced, quote, an unexpected turn of events that, as she put it, both defense attorneys were off the case. The judge said defense attorney Andrew Baldwin made an oral motion to withdraw, which she accepted. She also said defense attorney Bradley Rosie would subsequently submit a written motion to withdraw, which she would allow. Not the end of the story. After that unusual hearing, attorney Baldwin's attorney, the attorney hired an attorney, that's right, announced that the attorney for attorney Baldwin said that Baldwin did nothing wrong and that he was snookered and abused by the court. Defense attorney Rosie said this wasn't their choice and that the judge abused them and really sandbagged them. The defense attorneys really, and this is very unusual for comments like this to go back and forth between attorneys and a judge, extremely unusual. The defense attorneys released a statement that their client, Richard Allen, developed a strong and trusting bond, both with attorney Andrew Baldwin, and that if Mr. Baldwin was taken off his case, that would greatly prejudice his right to counsel in a timely trial. Those are very important Sixth Amendment ramifications. Baldwin and Rosie even filed to stay on the case, even on a pro bono basis, meaning without being paid. But Judge Gull struck their appearances in the court's docket and struck their documents. So now, despite new defense attorneys being appointed in the case, Baldwin and Rosie are asking the Indiana Supreme Court to intervene in the case. And if that's not the strangest set of circumstances I've heard of between a judge and attorneys, I don't know what is.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of sad the fact that they offered to work on it pro bono and the fact that they're trying to get intervention because I feel like if you're going that far with it, you must really believe in what you're doing. I don't know. It's not like I've never heard of a situation like this. This to me is completely crazy. This is
Yeah,
a mess.
I've been in court a number of times. I've been a member of the bar and licensed in 2 states for many years. And, I've generally gotten along with the judges, whether the case went my way or not. And I don't think any trial attorney is being honest if they say that every single case they've ever had went their way. But regardless of that, I've really never had that kind of tension with a judge. Generally speaking, if you're trying a case and a judge has a problem with what you're doing, it's like, okay, let's do a sidebar. You go over to the sidebar, you have a conversation with the stenographer there, and because the stenographer's there, everything is pretty much on the level. And people are, even if you're fighting tooth and nail, and I've been up against insurance companies that just your case is no good and your client is this and the case is, you maintain generally an amicable relationship both with the attorney, you don't personalize this, and definitely with the judge. I mean, I've never seen this kind of a thing happen, and I think a lot of observers are the same, that they've just this is something that is just unheard of. So
Mhm.
there's a couple of unanswered questions. One is, what's going to happen with this case now? The trial has been pushed back to October of 2024, a year away. And Mr. Allen is presumed innocent, but he's got to sit in I'm not going to say a dog cage sized cell because we don't know if that's true, but he is going to be incarcerated for another year while presumed innocent. And what about the parents of Libby and Abby? What have they been through and how do they feel? And I know one of the grandparents has been outspoken. What must they be thinking about this whole process?
Mhm. The fact that, like you mentioned, he's supposed to be presumed innocent and he's being held in this cage is mind-blowing. It's, I say cage, but I mean, I don't know, at the end of the day, I think that anybody watching can agree that the United States prison system is flawed and that these people, whether or not the cell that they're in is the size of a dog cage, they're still being treated like animals. And like you mentioned, like the parents, the relatives of the victims, this is how many years in the making, and now they know for sure they're gonna have to wait another year. And all- like we've talked about, this has gone completely off the rails. This just keeps going in every which way and direction, and it's insane. It's
Yeah,
insane.
the final train crash was precipitated by two events. One was that these photographs were released, and we think it wasn't by the attorney himself, but probably the thinking is that this happened due to the actions of a former employee and maybe a former friend who had access to the files, and the judge may have not liked the fact that anybody had access to the files, which are supposed to be locked. But if it's a former employee, that employee has access. But the other reason for this train crash is this whole Odinism thing and a 136-page motion. That is for our next podcast. So, Lainey, what are your thoughts?
I think that if your head isn't completely boggled and shocked by this, then you're a complete superhero. I think that anybody watching really needs to let us know what they think because this goes so many layers deep and this is absolutely crazy.
I agree 100%. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share if you've been intrigued by this content, and let your friends know what we're doing here. And we're trying to enlighten everyone. So have a great day. Be well. You have been watching About the Law, a production of the law offices of Andrew D. Myers in Methuen in the Merrimack Valley of Massachusetts and in Derry, just outside of Manchester, New Hampshire. Remember to click the like and subscribe buttons down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to share it with your friends and others. If you'd like to talk to me about an injury case, a car accident, a slip and fall, a serious bodily injury case, or some other case, please feel free to contact me. I'd love to talk to you. You can contact us through my website at attorney-myers.com. We have a contact us block, or you can call on one of the telephone numbers we've given there, or you can email me at andrew@attorney-myers.com. The foregoing is offered for informational purposes only. It is not intended as and does not constitute legal advice. Laws vary widely from state to state. You should rely only on the advice given to you during a personal consultation by a local attorney thoroughly familiar with state laws and the area of practice in which your concern lies. This podcast must be and hereby is labeled advertisement in some jurisdictions.